But while we watch that and keep that on screen, let's speak to Sunil Jinas, who is a global expert, who's here with me to unpack it all. Part of the expertise that we are roping in here on the SABC News. Sunil, thank you for coming through. So we're watching their visuals from Vertical Air Force Base, and we've been having this conversation about the streak of countries of the global south having been at the helm of the G20 presidency. By the way, I do need to apologize. When we do see the Prime Minister coming through, I will pause you for a moment. But just talk to me about the significance of the moment of that continuation, South Africa becoming the fourth president of the G20 from the global south in the last 4 years.
Thank you, Tulasizu. That's great. And we have seen now in the recent past, Brazil, India, Indonesia before that. It also speaks about the global south getting its true voice on a global stage. South Africa has done a fantastic job up till this point. Yesterday I attended many of the forums, the B20, I was at the social summit as well. The mood is exceptionally positive. We've seen the business people, we've seen government delegates on the ground talking about this. And in that process, what South Africa has actually done is re-establish the playing field with introduction, for example, of the AI task force and other initiatives, and particularly the ongoing themes that the prior states have been able to drive. We've seen that continuity.
Yeah. Say a bit more about the themes that are of particular significance to the global south, to the African continent, for example, the issues around debt sustainability. But also I've just been interested by this conversation about critical and leveraging those for development.
100%. We know that Africa is mineral rich. However, much of that is taken outside of the continent to be beneficated. And within that lies great opportunities. South Africa, for example, has more than 70% of platinum resources in the globe. And we know how that is important in everything from a catalyst in cars to utilization in other aspects as catalysts. More particularly, if you look at the DR Congo, for example, at this stage, the cobalt resources that lie there. Again, there's huge opportunity for Africa to catalyze on this in terms of funding, making available development funding for those countries themselves to become engines of growth within their rightful places. And if we link that further to the GDP and borrowing and so on and so forth, we know that African countries pay significantly higher for credit around the globe.
Yeah.
And a small reduction will result in more accessible income, which can be then proliferated in education, in development, in health, etc. So this particular G20 is going to put the global south fairly and squarely in the center.
How important is it that some of that work reflects in the final declaration, the leaders' declaration? Because, Sunil, there have been countless meetings in the year of South Africa's presidency, over 130 meetings in various streams, some of which you wouldn't ordinarily link to the G20 and what it's intended to do, but actually somehow feeding together. And some of them outside of the 15 working groups of the Shepherd Track.
Let me take you back to take you forward.
Yes.
For the very first time, we have something called the Africa Engagement Framework, which was endorsed by finance ministers in October earlier this year. That's a 5-year plan focusing on Africa. So this is not an event. It's part of a continuum to something which is a forward-looking 5-year plan. The G20 is coming to town. The Prime Minister Modi, as you know, has just touched down here in South Africa. But the show will not stop and move to another country without tangible elements left behind. Because those finance ministers on the African continent, they represent the economies of these 55 African countries, and they've committed to that 5-year plan. So we are definitely going to see vestiges of the G20 manifesting itself on the ground for the benefit of people. It's not going to be etched in documents that are lying in the corners of offices. But more particularly, because of some of the challenges we faced during our G20 presidency around participation and so on,
yeah,
we are looked on as a watershed moment. So this will be our moment in history where we've planted a stake, quote unquote, on a celestial body, not the moon in this case, but on global politics.
Yeah. So say a bit more about that, because the coincidence of our presidency with a rather difficult, altogether difficult geopolitical situation, muddied waters, up is down, down is up, left is right, right is left. Everything we've known about a rules-based international order is being upended. How have we navigated it in your assessment?
We must look to our allies before we look beyond that. We have the G7, which supports us. The European Union has come out tremendously in support. We also have the African Union. Those are our bedrock of what has been developed. Of course, and the elephant in the room is the United States and what is being happening there. That's back and forth. We cannot comment on that fully at this stage because nobody knows who's actually going to pitch up eventually at the G20. But South Africa has remained steadfast together with its allies, together with the other G20 members that have been part and parcel of this. Commitments have been made, funding commitments have been made, and these have been signed. Bilaterals have also happened, and that augurs well for all Africans and people in the global south, despite the challenges we've seen.
Yeah. And then let me ask you, how does South Africa at this stage, I imagine this is a critical stage, from other international fora such as these, international conferences and summits, the dying minutes and seconds before a leader's declaration or a summit declaration are sleepless nights for the likes of Zane Dango, South Africa's Sherpa for the G20, and the Sioux Sherpas and others that are involved. How does South Africa ensure that you guard against being derailed by too much of a focus on the theatrics, on the aesthetics and just the friction and the tension that is away from the agenda?
We must look at the critical mass of the G20. And the critical mass is in support of South Africa. Zane, his team, everyone else that's been part of this focus has to focus on the work that's happened over these last 11 months. And they've got a goal and an objective to place. We are also tremendously supported by the prior countries, including Brazil, India, Indonesia, in terms of various aspects. And I think one of the things that is critical is the digital public infrastructure, which we didn't touch on, but I suppose that came up during India's presidency and very much so during Brazil's presidency. And that talks to a greater need for us, Thulasizwe, for the establishment of this DPI, not only in South Africa, but continent-wide. We've seen now there's massive investment in internet cables from the United States to Asia and so on. But Africa and the global south should not just be a station where something touches and goes. The people need to benefit from this.
Yeah, and I mean, as I reflect on the Indian Prime Minister, it's been that back and forth even for him with the relationship with Washington. Just that relationship there's been a significant toing and froing in the last few months, certainly in the second Trump administration, where you've seen it almost, slip away, that relationship, but also then seeing a sort of, pulling together at various points. As we speak right now, there's a bit of that debate that they're having about, the possibility of 350% tariffs and the likes. How do you believe countries such as India view this moment and the need to step forward and pick up the mantle of global leadership, particularly in shaping a declaration? How important does it become for South Africa to not end with a chairperson's statement, but rather a declaration that says to the United States, you didn't participate, you wanted us to not have a declaration, but the critical mass that you were talking about has decided that actually we are going to come out with a declaration?
Key to this is the one-is-to-many situation, that there's many countries that have fallen, I would say, backwards in this process through US tariffs, but the people in the United States are the people who are actually paying, or the individuals are paying for this. If you look at currently the European Union and Germany in particular, many of South Africa's exports don't bear tariff. In fact, up to 96% of our exports from South Africa don't have a tariff. That already tells you that there are alternatives for countries to trade. What India has done, India and its government and its people, they represent over 1 billion people. They know the power of that purchasing, or the power of that purchasing parity. They also have lent on their relationships through BRICS with Russia and Brazil and, of course, South Africa. And because there's a common theme that is amongst these different nations, they've taken into account this in their planning and preparation. Therefore, that declaration will be the voice of the many that are attending and that have participated in this.
Yeah.
These countries will not be bullied. It's very, very clear, and everyone can see that right now.
Yeah. All right. As we are talking, Sunil, we are seeing those are members of the South African Air Force standing guard and basically giving a guard of honor with the red carpet having been rolled out just in front of Air India One, that Boeing 777. We are awaiting for that door to open, and we will see the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who is participating in the 12th summit of the G20 since 2014. There you see the officials. Mfundo, I don't know on your side if you can see who is receiving the Indian Prime Minister. It has to do with my age and and my eyesight that I can barely see who from the government level is going to be receiving the Indian Prime Minister. But let's let you take in the sights and sounds coming through from Air Force Base Waterkloof. Guinness, who is a global expert, helping us make sense of some of the themes. So Sunil, one of the issues that came to the fore during South Africa's presidency is the role of technology and the minerals that drive that technology, but more importantly, the technology itself, and ensuring that developing nations, the global south, are not left behind. As the team tells me, that it's the minister in the presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, who is on standby to receive the Indian Prime Minister. To what extent has this presidency been useful in driving that conversation about AI, the new technologies, and the massive economy that has been spawned by these technologies?
Thanks to Lasizwe. The AI matter is critical because the European Union has put in place an act. They've been leading on this. The Global North has been leading on AI regulatory frameworks. As Africa and as South Africa, we don't have the same level of resources to be able to replicate the structures of the EU AI Act, which means that the task force, and I've seen that as well in some of the engagements there, have taken into account that first and foremost, the concept of Ubuntu, that is human participation, recognizing another human.
Yeah.
And that cultural factors be featured into this, become part and parcel of the regulatory frameworks. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is that together with the African Union, which has put in place a broad framework for AI development, South Africa is playing a key role. It has already its AI policy framework in place, which is now going through the rounds of the different committees to then eventually end up at Parliament. But there's that consistent benchmarking that's taking place. The third and most important aspect of this is our capacity development of young people, and everybody for that matter, in the use of AI, the actual use of AI, the development of AI skills itself, understanding that using a large language model is a basic AI skill, which is prompting. But there are more important aspects that AI can be utilized for to enhance a whole spectrum of things, from the health of Africans to financial literacy to education. And I think this is where the real value of AI will lie for us with the young population, just to start off with. Then if we look at that on a bigger scale, it's the very first time that a task force for AI has been put in place under this G20 presidency.
Yeah.
And this was set to continue. You've seen in the United States, who are going to be the next president, their big tech companies have been in regular engagement with the President of the United States, let alone that in the UK with the various royal members, etc. And there is currently the race on AI. And we have China on the one side, which has a blended sort of approach, which is regulation and taking into account the states' needs. You have the EU AI Act, and then you have the United States, which has in large parts put frameworks in place for the implementation of this. But critical to all of this is the biases that creep in on AI. Yes. Critical to all of this is the ability to have sandboxes where you can play with things before AI can create a challenge.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point that you make, Sunil, and I don't want it to be lost, because a lot of the expectation is that continuity might be a challenge, going from the South African presidency of the G20 to the US presidency of the G20. You are saying to me, as we await for that door to open and see the Indian Prime Minister, are you saying to me that this may just be one of those where continuity is not that much of a challenge, the AI conversation?
It has to be, because it's the future right now, and there's nothing that has come along forget the Industrial Revolution, forget the internet, forget the different stages of Industrial Revolution, etc. There's nothing more important right now for the democratization of AI, firstly, and that AI benefits the entire globe, not centers of power in Silicon Valley or in Europe or in Asia, for that matter. Africans need to be part and parcel, and that's about our compute power as well. Having that compute power on our continent, it's about the human capital development, and then it's about the application of AI.
And the critical elements as well that go into, and the energy needs of all of these technologies.
100%. We're seeing now in Europe that the big tech companies are looking at previous coal-fired stations.
Yes.
To become energy sources. In other parts of the world, they're actually taking these data centers and putting them inside oceans to cool these data centers.
Yeah.
As they continue with the compute power. So we're also going to be seeing more and more that sustainability aspect of the globe. You're going to find edge and tension there. And you spoke earlier on, as I walked in, about the SDGs. One of the critical aspects of the SDGs and our G20 presidency is sustainability. But it's not about people only, it's about technology. It's also about making those SDG goals and equality, which is there. Those have to be factored in to the next presidency, of course.
So let me just reflect a little bit then, as you see those visuals of members of the SANDF on standby to receive and give a guard of honor to the visiting Prime Minister of India, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who will at any moment now step out of Air India One and basically make his way down the stairs, where the minister in the presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, is on standby to receive him in South Africa. The Indian Prime Minister making a point that he will be participating at all the sessions of the summit, and is actually expected to speak at least 3 of the sessions that will be happening among the leaders, the G20 leaders. And also weaving in and talking to the continuity that Sunil and I were talking to in the last few minutes between the various presidencies and the Indian Prime Minister, reflecting on that continuity and talking about the theme that they developed when they hosted the G20 in 2023, which was the theme of One Earth, One Family, One Future, and linking that to South Africa's solidarity, equality, and sustainability. So you can trace those linkages. Let me put it to you then, Sunil. There's a conversation that says, and it's certainly coming from the United States, it suggests that this thing has become too big and uncontrollable, unwieldy. The G20, in that we started out talking economic sustainability, balance of the global economy, and guarding against any systemic shocks and preempting those and formulating solutions even before the problem arises. You guys now have everything under the sun. You have climate, you have women empowerment, you have all of these issues that you and I have been talking about. Is that a problem or is that a strength? Can these developmental issues be isolated, the developmental issues as centered by the global South countries in the last few years? Can they be isolated from pure economics?
It's a wonderful question. The G20 was conceptualized during the economic shocks that the globe experienced.
Yeah.
And as you know, finance ministers were essentially involved, and it is morphed. My question to you is humanity remaining consistent? Then why then should the G20 agenda be the very same one that it was conceptualized in? Darwin's theory tells you that if you're not able to adapt, you will die, right? That's what Dawantiri says. So that's also being applied into this mix. The other aspect is you can't say that more than 60% of the world's population is not important to the global agenda. And then there in that 60% of the population, what are the challenges? If those challenges are not addressed within those countries, they will end up, as we have seen, at the doorsteps of developed nations, who, by the way, have also been part and parcel of increasing our challenges with carbon monoxide in the atmosphere in general, right? In terms of industrialization and so on and so forth. So the developed nations also have a role to play in the G20 where they set the playing fields level again.
Yeah.
And that means the agenda of these developing countries or least development countries have to be factored in. And if you ask yourself, what is those? You and I grew up in a time when apartheid was rife in this country. We had different challenges that we had to come through. We succeeded despite that, right? These generations, which are the newborns in our country and many other democratized states, they should have the same privilege of democracy that's experienced in first world countries. And therefore, it's very important that this does not become too large. The European Union represents many states, more than 20 states. The African Union, the same. It has a seat within the G20. It doesn't mean that we have 40 countries here, that it's over-bloated.
All right, Sunil, I think let's pause there for a moment as we see some of the officials, the diplomatic officials, just laying the ground and preparing for the Indian Prime Minister to walk down those stairs where the Minister in the Presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, is awaiting to receive him. There's the Indian Prime Minister arriving. So there you have it. The Indian Prime Minister has arrived to take up his seat among the G20 leaders, and where he will be seeking to, entrench some of the positions that have been taken by the successive presidencies of the G20 that have come from the global south, starting with Indonesia, then followed by India, then followed by Brazil, and then South Africa. There he will be making his way from Air Force Base Waterkloof, one of the many arrivals, many presidents that have come through, and heads of state and government, really, because some countries you will have a prime minister and not necessarily the president coming through. So there you have the Indian Prime Minister. He has already arrived, being given a warm South African welcome. And as I was saying, I did see, as I was making my way to Nasrec, that you've got all these posters plastered on the highways greeting these delegates and these heads of state in true South African style. The one I saw that was quite dominant was Sawubona, welcome Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Among some of the issues that he says he looks forward to taking part in the discussions will be about leaving no one behind, building our economies, the role of trade, financing for development, and the debt burden. So that's the one session that he will be participating in. Then also about a resilient world, the G20's contribution, disaster risk reduction, and climate change, and the just energy transitions. And then there's one on food systems and a fair and just future for all, building on how India framed its G20 presidency, one earth, one family, one future, and building upon that and saying with South Africa, solidarity, equality, and sustainability. So now let me bring you in as we watch the Indian Prime Minister walk out of shot and basically make his way to the awaiting motorcade. These themes, solidarity, equality, sustainability, honestly speaking, how much can a country like South Africa achieve within a year that speaks to those? Because these sound like aspirational goals. How much progress can you make towards achieving something that, even by your own admission, is more aspirational?
We have a lived reality which talks to those three themes. If you think about the dawn of our democracy, many people would not have believed the peaceful transition that took place. Subsequent to that, yes, South Africa does have problems, but we have a working democracy, which is important. And embedded in that has been sustainability, equality in the country. The Constitution is a harbinger of equality, right? And as we progress, we're seeing that in our daily lives here, because the most important thing is you have to be an exemplar of what you want others to do. And South Africa, in its own small way, being at the southernmost tip of Africa, has demonstrated that. We punch above our weight on the global stage. It's a well-known fact. So that's the first point. The second thing is this, that the world has become more globalized than ever before. With the advent of technology and the use of all these applications and so on and so forth. So we are more part of the global trade system, the global community, than we've ever been. And these three themes that have been picked, they are not only particular to South Africa. You've traveled the world and so have I. You find the same challenges as you move from place to place. In the middle of most cities, you find hustle and bustle. When the city dies down, anything could be happening. And then as you move out, you find families living there, and then you find farms in the peri-urban areas.
Yeah.
So these three themes remain sacrosanct to the UN's SDGs firstly, which all nations have signed up, the 206 UN nations. Then it's a drop down within the G20 with a select group of countries and nations who have to implement this. So as much as many people may say these are aspirational goals, we've lived it, and other countries, they have their own data points to meet in terms of that.
Yeah. So as a parting shot, Sunil, wrap it all up nicely for me about what the moment represents for South Africa, for the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, his stature and standing on the global stage, because that's under the spotlight one way or another. I mean, you hear commentary that says the non-attendance of the US president and Javier Milei, the president of Argentina, is a snub and it's of particular significance. But the flip side of that, you're hearing arguments that say it's not unusual for heads of state and government to say, I cannot attend, but I'm participating fully. For instance, in the Sherpa trek and the conversations led by the Sherpa, where these leaders are actually represented directly by the people that serve in those systems. So wrap it up nicely. What's your framing and understanding of what the moment has represented for this country, for the Ramaphosa administration, and have we seized the moment?
Let me quickly just start with the US-Argentina matter. The Argentina peso has been pegged to the US dollar for years. There's a relationship there, and it's been the dumping ground of non-sustainable vehicles, etc. So that relationship could be tied at the hip for different reasons. Now, wrapping it all up, we are interested in who is here to support us. We are interested in who is going to lend their voices to the final declaration. We are interested by the show of population of the world's largest percentage of human beings. And lastly, we are interested in the continuity that will happen. And South Africa has very strategically selected aspects and themes and working groups that will affect the globe. The B20 has seen vast participation by the American business people. They have lauded the B20 and the South African business people for what they've been able to do. We're getting something right on the precipice of this G20. The momentum is there. For President Cyril Ramaphosa, with all the challenges that he has faced, he has represented us well as a people, and he has kept our pride intact.
All right, let's leave it there for this afternoon. Sunil Jinas, who is a global expert, joining me in conversation in the last while as we were watching the arrival of the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who joins a whole host of other leaders in the last while that have arrived. The President of Brazil, Lula Inácio Lula da Silva, among those that arrived. The Prime Minister of Vietnam, as well as leaders from the EU also who have made their way into the country. So lots more coverage to come for you. You're watching SABC News. We are the host broadcaster of G20 South Africa 2025. Stay with us.
SABC, host broadcaster of the G20 South Africa 2025.